We are currently living in the darkest of days, and things are escalating at terrifying rates, and most Americans have no clue what's really happening behind those closed doors. So, I put together 30 minutes of the most important information Andy Schectman has exposed on the podcast I do with him. So you are about to be fed fact after statistic and information that is truly priceless and terrifying. You might want to show this video to your loved ones. Fair warning, we talk about some heavy stuff, so viewer discretion is advised.
We have over 12 million people who've entered this country illegally and from all over the world, as you say. And I was watching Fox News this morning, and they were talking about how the largest number of people coming across right now are Chinese nationals. And if you look at these people, they're wearing nice clothes and carrying a Toomey suitcase. They didn't walk from Central America. Who the hell is flying these people from all around the world to the United States or to Mexico to cross the border? How are they getting here? And I find it to be very disturbing. And if 0.2% of these people have bad intentions, look at the chaos that three idiots did at the Kansas City Chiefs parade yesterday. Well, if 0.2% of 12 million people is 24,000 people, or 1% of these people who have bad intentions, then being 120,000 people, what kind of chaos could be coordinated and done? If I had to guess, the black swans would come from one of three areas. Number one could be a cyber attack, cyber threat, or solar flare, something that would render the internet or the electrical grid or whatever it may be inoperable for a period of time. Hopefully not too long, God willing. And one could be a homegrown terror threat. We've been warned this ad nauseum by the head of the FBI, and certainly with all the people entering this country illegally every single day, the chances of that happening, people entering this country for unpure reasons, becomes greater and greater and greater when you look at the numbers that are coming in. And then the third is the one that I've focused on forever, and that's just the growing de-dollarization trend. The BRICS trend, the countries like United Arab Emirates, which is the 7th largest producer of oil in the world and just joined BRICS alongside Saudi Arabia. When you go through several years of a structural supply deficit in silver, we've talked about this before, 200 million ounces short. It doesn't even take into account the military industrial complex, which you and I have talked about a lot. Had a gentleman in Vancouver come up to me who works on the Patriot missile, said, yes, there is that amount of silver in it. And that's just one form of munitions. How about all the missiles? And how about all the high-tech weaponry? And there's a big deficit, and people understand that. It's needed in solar panels. It's needed in green and digital technology. It's experienced a monetary renaissance. And you have all of these silver speculators who are watching the counterintuitive nature of the metal and becoming, or the pricing of the metal, and becoming more and more frustrated. And many have capitulated. That's the biggest mistake, because the big rise that everyone expects that attracted them in the first place, to me, is getting much closer when you realize that there are people capitulating. You got Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, saying there will be, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, there will be problems. You have 200 or 300 sheriffs from the United States that just met with the FBI, and the sheriff from a small town in Ohio went on YouTube and talked about this and said exactly that, you know, president won't meet with the sheriffs. And so we met with the FBI, and they said that there hasn't been red flags like this since before 9/11. And that's a matter of if, not a matter if, but when there will be some sort of an event. What is the government supposed to do but to protect the borders and to protect the country, and to come in undocumented at a time when the United States is very polarizing, and there are obviously people here with intent that isn't really American. Yeah, what could happen? What will happen? Get this, man. This comes from the Congressional Budget Office, and it says that the interest on the debt, and that's a U.S. government branch, the interest on the debt plus mandatory entitlement spending, which would be things like Social Security, which, by the way, is off balance sheet and it's already over 70 trillion in the hole. And by 2035, they project it to be insolvent. But within 7 years, by 2031, The interest on the debt plus mandatory entitlement spending will consume 100% of federal tax revenue. That's the government's own admission. They're saying right now that in 7 years, all of the tax revenue they take will only cover the interest on the debt and the mandatory entitlement spending. So that means in 7 years, the entire budget of the US, the discretionary budget, which includes military, will have to be borrowed. I'll say something that goes back hundreds of years. There was a man named Voltaire, and he said paper money eventually returns to its intrinsic value, zero. And he wrote that in the 1700s, sometime long time ago. But that's something that I think people are going to begin to understand as we see the government here completely and totally pivot and now signal 3 rate decreases. The rest of the world, I think, will look at that. The Western media says, "Oh, we've beaten inflation." I don't think we've beaten inflation at all. I think we've surrendered. The central banks would hold their gold at the New York Fed and the Bank of England because it allows them access to the price setting mechanism of the COMEX and the LBMA. And I think as we move closer to some event that will center around gold, we will see, I believe, price setting emerge in other parts of the globe. India just opened up an exchange. You have the Shanghai Gold Exchange, you have the Moscow Exchange, you have the exchange in Dubai. You're going to see price setting move away from the West and move to the East, where these countries are the epicenter of gold and silver. And the reason that you don't see as much bitching by these countries for the suppression of the West is that they're on a buying spree. And if you're going to slowly and methodically drain the coffers around the globe, you want there to be Western suppression. You're beating the West at their own game. Well, I mean, look at the United States. Everyone assumes that we're so wealthy, but look at our balance sheet. We have $5 trillion in assets, of which 40% is student debt. Yes, that's right. You heard me. The U.S. government considers student debt to be an asset. And so you take that out, that's 1.6 trillion. You take that out, we have just over 3.5 trillion in assets backing 150 or more trillion in debt. 34 trillion on balance sheet, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions. We are above 150 trillion in debt. We are insolvent. We're broke. And so, how wealthy are we? We are a country that has had the ability to print money at will. So yes, we have the appearance of being very wealthy, but in essence, it's all an illusion. It's all a mirage. I spent a few hours at a conference in Las Vegas a few months ago with a Border Patrol agent from Texas, and the stories he told me were ridiculous. And I don't know at this point how you truly fix it, but when you got people who come to this country who will beat up police officers in Manhattan in broad daylight, or grab someone in broad daylight in New York City and drag a 60-year-old woman behind a scooter, these kinds of things, this isn't the country that we grew up in. And all of a sudden, if we don't do something to address it, there's going to be very big problems. Because go try and do this in any other country. Go try and do this in China, see what happens, or Korea, or go to another country and just walk across their border and claim asylum and see what happens. Well, the byproduct of hyperinflation would be interest rates that would have to rise to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. I've talked about that moment, and I see it where OPEC dumps the dollar efficiently. It's one thing for the United Arab Emirates to say it. It's one thing for Russia and Iran to say it, and they all three have. It's another thing for all of OPEC and the OPEC plus countries to say we're no longer taking dollars. Every country on the planet has had to stockpile them for the last 50 years, part of the petrodollar deal. And if that incentive is gone and everyone dumps it, there's your hyperinflationary moment where all of the dollars, many more outside the country than in, dump and hit our shores and overwhelm the issuer, us, and we're choking on dollars, creating a hyperinflationary moment. If you have 20% inflation, you can't have 5% interest rates. You might as well use your currency as toilet paper. So ask yourself this question, man. How the hell can we remain the dominant economic and military superpower in the world when we have to borrow money just to pay the interest on our debt and to fund our military? Why would our foes, like China, want to, and Russia and Saudi Arabia, why would they want to borrow us money for us to fund our
attack
military?
them, right, and attack
Right, and not protect them, actually push back against them. You look at a comment that Putin made at a conference that he was just at, and he said that the next meeting for the BRICS, which will be in Russia this coming summer, will be dedicated to a fair world order. He said, as a world order based on rules, there are no such rules. In fact, they change every day depending on the current political situation and short-term interests of those who talk about it. And you and I have talked at length about the lack of reporting on military in the Silver Institute's numbers. I said this at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference a year ago, and a gentleman got up and said, what I'm going to tell you is declassified. I work for the DoD, and I actually was on the team that developed the Patriot missile, and I know there's silver in it. I just don't know how much. I'll let you know. Well, he was at the show here last week, 2 weeks ago, when I was in Vancouver speaking, and he showed me pictures and all sorts of stuff of how he helped develop it, and that he said, you're right. There's between 15 and 16 kilos of silver in the tip of a Tomahawk cruise missile. If there's that much silver in a Tomahawk cruise missile, where's the rest of the silver going in all of these other forms of high-tech weaponry? And it's just becoming obvious that the military-industrial complex has a lot to do with holding the price of silver down. He talked about things that you don't have to be an economist or even particularly astute to see what's happening. And when he says, do people in your country even know why the dollar is the dollar and how you're cutting off your own hand by weaponizing it? Look, it's one thing to sanction, and that's bad enough, especially when they look at the way we go about our business and through coercion and bombing and all of the things that we do to maintain our dominance and our hegemony. No matter what the cause is, there's always someone who looks at something differently. Their viewpoint may be different than ours. There will be ramifications when you not just sanction like we did with Iran. In the case of Russia, they want to confiscate $300 billion in Russian FX reserves and use it to fund the Ukrainian war, which is just insane. There will be no one that will ever trust us again as the world reserve currency. You can't do that. The bottom line is that, yeah, I think indeed what he said is very logical, that, you can't go around the world using the heavy hand. And if you look at what is making, at least outwardly appearing to me, making this BRICS coalition grow, where 35 more countries have formally applied, is the cooperative manner. None of these countries in BRICS have any obligation to one another. They are all there cooperative in nature, and they want to do things in a mutually beneficial, cooperative manner. That's what I think he is saying, is that the cooperation is gone. It's all about coercion, and it's in many of the world's eyes, it is hypocritical. And the backlash that is coming as a result of it, I think, is only gaining in momentum. He might not be the boogeyman that he appears to be,
right,
when you listen to him speak. And again, I'm not a Putin bobo. I'm not a Putin apologist. I just think that there are two sides to every story. And, ask the people in other countries how they feel about the United States, which is supposedly the beacon of freedom and the greatest country in the world. And I think you'd get varying opinions. So if you don't understand the opposite viewpoint, if you don't understand what other people are saying, not only do you never grow, you just end up, I think, learning more and more about less and less till you know everything about nothing. And you have to have a broader understanding of the way the world, or even if you go to, it's like going to court for your life and you hire an attorney who says, nah, we don't need to understand what the plaintiff's argument is. I just want to hear yours. It's interesting. A few weeks ago, we saw that the LME was going to start hosting contracts off the Shanghai exchange. Now in Shanghai, silver's $2.50 nearly, $2.30 higher than it is in London or on the COMEX. That's arbitrage territory, where the traders who have access to both markets will buy in London, will buy in Chicago, will sell in Shanghai. That metal will never come back, ever. And that's why they are slowly turning up the heat 10% interest in arbitrage, traders will jump all over that. They'll buy, millions of ounces and sell them for $2.50 higher than they paid for them. Who wouldn't do that, right? Except the bigger picture of it is the metal will never come back. Gold has been between 60 and $160 higher per ounce, same thing. You'll see that number go higher and higher and higher as they slowly drain the system. This is a gradual process that when it snaps, they'll be like, oh my God, that was the greatest profit ever. But in the meantime, they're going to lose their mind. If you own it as wealth and understand exactly what is happening and that there is that potential for it to really take off, it makes it a whole lot easier. But if you buy it simply to get wealthy, you better have proper time frame, and you better understand that, yeah, you probably have a decent chance of doing well in it, but it will be counterintuitive. It won't be easy. And for a lot of people, they don't have what it takes to hang on, and they capitulate. And that's, to me, as I was saying earlier, when you see structural deficits the way we have been for years, when you see such bullish, silver bullish friendly news, and it goes the other way, you get people that get frustrated and capitulate. And these are the people that bought it for a reason, for this moonshot reason. And when they're the ones finally letting go, it tells me from a contrarian viewpoint that we're getting closer to that moment.
I don't think personally we could pay back 34 trillion. I think it would have to be a default or a reset. But what are your thoughts on that?
They have two choices: to inflate or default. The third is find a villain. That 34 trillion doesn't take into account Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions. Social Security, 77 trillion underfunded. I say it on every interview I do, and some people probably grow tired of hearing it, but a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. You can't pay that back. How do you pay that back? We spent 900 billion on interest payments alone this last year. This year, it's projected to be 1.2 trillion. In 6.5 years, it projects to take 100% of all the tax revenues just to pay the interest on the debt and mandatory entitlement spending like Social Security. Well, you look at the Communist Manifesto and it, chapter 1, divide and conquer. Well, we are a divided country. We are not a unified, united country anymore. And that's the scariest part of all, is that, if your back is to the wall, as the Americans have been for many times in the past, it was, I believe, everyone pulling together at the same time for a common goal, and that's the thing. We're not white or black or red or blue, or we're Americans. And part of the problem is that we are now letting in literally 10 million people into this country illegally. Now, California just passed a law that all of these people who have entered the country illegally will be given
housing, cell phones,
and medical care. And how do you pay for that? I guess I'd say it's a culture war that we're facing, and in market turndowns or in market collapses, cultural wars become especially dangerous in financial and economic collapses. The country's been kind of demoralized by, at least some people have, by the washing away of traditional values, and I think that's kind of it. People can't even talk to each other anymore. I think, traditional Americans in the red states think that Trump is being railroaded with lawfare. There was a report by a small college in Virginia that said like 53% of Democrats feel that violence is acceptable in achieving their goals, and 47% of Republicans say the same thing. We are a country that is not united anymore. If you look at the last 50 years, actually it's even longer than that. It's the last 60 years. Every single year from 1959 to 2023, the money supply was up. Every single year, up on average 7%, with the exception of 2022, it was down 1%, 2023 down 2%. M2 contracted. You heard about this big contraction in the money supply. People were talking about it and what that would mean to the economy. Well, for 60 years, it was up every single year, and then it was only down 1% and 2%. In 2020, it was up 25%. In 2021, it was up 12%. That is inflation, increase in the money supply, period. And everyone's been talking about this big contraction in the money supply, and that's what's going to quell inflation. Well, lo and behold, it's an election year and M2 just turned back up again. If I had only one trade to make, only one, I'd buy gold. And I know that's not what you or your listeners want to hear, but it's because it's the only other tier one asset on the planet and the biggest money in the world knows it. However, with that being said, I believe that silver is the most undervalued asset on the planet and probably the best investment I've ever seen in my career. And if I had two trades to make, I would load up on silver with the intention of trading a good portion of it into gold when that ratio corrects. Playing that ratio game is something that I've done before successfully. In 2010, it was 85 to 1. It was the second time in human history it ever been that high. I told people, sell your gold right now and buy silver. And within 7 months, you had 37 to 1, just below its 200-year average of roughly 42 to 1. That was over a double with no risk in 7 months and no money outlaid. Look, the bottom line is that the deteriorating finances of our government and the consequences of our actions are and of our deteriorating reputation on the world stage at some point is going to have some consequences. It's not lost on the rest of the world. And I think this is why you accumulate gold and silver. It is not to become wealthy. It is to protect yourself from what is coming. And if you do it that way and don't buy it with the expectations of selling it to become wealthy, but buying it to allow you to survive what is coming and maybe even thrive, I think it makes it a whole lot easier to handle these ups and these downs. And even as counterintuitive as they are, see it for what it is. It's desperation. It's a drive-by shooting when the labor numbers come out and they slam the price of it. The labor numbers are a scam. I wonder how many people out there know that the LME, the London Metals Exchange, was purchased by China a few years ago. Now, think about that for a moment. The topic the concept that I present over and over and over again is the concept of logarithmic decay, where all of these things, whether we talk culturally, economically, morally, socially, or in the case of the dollar, and the plotting of the BRICS nations is little by little by little by little by little by little by little, then bang, all at once. It's chopping down a tree with a butter knife. It takes a long time, little by little. Every swat takes a little piece out. It's, if you ever watched the movie The Shawshank Redemption, he cut his way through with like a spoon or whatever. It took him years to dig the hole and finally get out all at once. But little by little by little, he made significant progress. And that's kind of what's happening when I look at the Chinese. I don't think gold is undervalued. It's the dollar that's overvalued. And I would simply say to you that you pull the suppression, the Western suppression, out of the price of gold and silver, it will go higher than anyone thinks possible. And I think ultimately that's what happens, is that you see the Shanghai exchange or some exchange like that in Dubai or Moscow or wherever it may be, or in coordination, these exchanges reprice gold and silver. Not only would it reliquefy their countries the way Roosevelt did in 33 and get their balance sheet in order, but they're the ones who produce it all, accumulate it all, and they obviously see the importance of it. So to revalue it, yeah, I think you could see that ratio massively swing in the other direction. Guys like Big Swears say it's going to go, single digit, and maybe even silver move ahead of gold in terms of that ratio. You can look at something like Ron Paul, who's tried repeatedly to audit the Fort Knox gold holdings, and he's shot down continuously. And why? And it begs the question: if this is the American, this is the goal of the American people, then why not be forthright about it? And this is another rallying cry that we're seeing is how opaque our system is, the lack of transparency. And this is why I believe, in order to make this work, which it will, a system that will use gold pegging will have to marry blockchain technology, so that you can have transparency and no more promises and opaque. If we can't show the world what we're holding, if we're not going to audit it, and if people are going to try to get it back and it takes 3 years, I mean, well, it seems like the phone is locked and you're hiding something. The big money is using the price, suppression of price, and the emotions, the emotions that get in the way of logical thinking in this respect to drain the systems. And yeah, I think that the biggest mistake people could make is buying silver to become wealthy, because it increases the frustration when you see things that are counterintuitive the way they are. When you buy it as wealth and take a step back and look at the big picture, the historical context, the need for silver, which is strategic, not just industrial, time is on your side, hopefully, if you're young enough to realize that, yeah, it's just a matter of time